everyone, it's Evelyn from Tolkien About It, and welcome to our first kind of bonus material for information on chapters of The Hobbit. I'm really excited to be doing these, and hopefully I'll have some of the other hosts joining me, but, you know, timing, fun stuff. In this very first episode, we talk about the first chapter, An Unexpected Party, and the unexpected part is we get introduced to basically 15 main characters, essentially, and a lot of them with rhyming names. Now, I want to be very clear. Tolkien was not a writer prior to writing The Hobbit. He was an academic. He wrote academic papers and a couple fairy tales. He didn't really write books, let alone children's books. So when he chose the names for the dwarves, he was really focusing more on his academic side, where he takes the names from a book of elves from Nordic myth. So that's where these names actually come from. Now, all of the different dwarves, they did mean to have a bigger role individually throughout the book, but his editor and publisher begged him to make it easier on the readers, and so he condensed a lot of what they did to just a couple people, and he merged a lot of them together, saying Killy and Philly both did this, Owen and Glowin did that, etc. And even though he did condense it, he did make sure that each dwarf individually had at least one moment of recognition throughout the entire book. So, who are all these people? Well, welcome to What Are You Doing in My Swamp? Hobbit Edition. Let's start. So first of all, we have Bilbo Baggins, the main character of our story here. He is a simple hobbit of better means. He's upper class for sure. And he's definitely more in tune to the comforts, especially for a hobbit. And it's kind of hinted that he might be an investor, is how he works. So that's what he does, is he invests in people and loans them money. He comes from the Took family on his mother's side, Belladonna Took, who are definitely more adventurous for hobbits. And even though they're wealthier, they're not quite as upstanding hobbits. So when she married his father and became a Baggins, she started becoming a little bit more of a proper hobbit herself, raising her son to be a proper hobbit as well. And as we see in this first chapter, Bilbo is rather proper, but he definitely has an interest in some adventure. And that brings us to Gandalf. In Lord of the Rings, we know Gandalf as Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White. But in Hobbit, we just have Gandalf the Grey. He is a wandering wizard who is much more important than he lets on. He does tend to prefer the simple things, but he also likes to challenge people, which is kind of what he does with Bilbo. He likes to challenge him. He sees that he's interested in adventure, and so he gives him the opportunity to explore it. Gandalf the Grey, he's very chill. He doesn't want any power. He doesn't want to be in charge of things. He doesn't want to be important. He finds that everyday people and everyday hobbits themselves are important. And so that's more or less what we have of Gandalf in The Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings. And definitely a lot of humor. The humor that we get from Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, you can tell that the origins definitely come from The Hobbit. And now, the invasion of the dwarves, where I can just imagine Bilbo's face on Shrek just going, "What are you doing in my swamp?" Because they truly invade. The most important of the dwarves is going to be Thorin Oakenshield, who is the king of Erebor. Unfortunately, Erebor is completely dominated by smog, so Thorin is a king of a people who are completely displaced and now are regulated to the bottom of other dwarven society, just trying to survive. And Thorin his grandfather was the king when smog came, and did his thing, kicking everyone out. And Thorin was very lucky. He was a child at the time who happened to be outside the mountain playing in the forest. And that's truly the only reason that he was able to escape. Very few dwarves were actually able to escape the destruction of Smaug, and he remembers very clearly watching that happen. And then his grandfather and then his father later passed, while also trying to figure out a way to bring their family back to Erebor and retake their ancestral home. And now he is the king, and now bringing the pride of his people back and bringing them back to their ancestral homeland is now on his shoulders. We have an age for him at 195, which is about middle age. Now, Thorin himself is not married or has any children, but he has his sister who he loves dearly and who becomes the queen in name while he is away for his quest for Erebor. But he takes with him his nephews, Fili and Kili. Now, Fili and Kili are 82 and 77 respectively, and they are the princes, and Fili, being the oldest, is actually the heir to Thorin's throne. They are considered still kind of older teenagers, young adults. They're not considered quite adult yet. Fili is kind of an adult, but Kili is not. And the only reason that they're really going along with Thorin and allowed to go with him is because they are the princes of Erebor. And while they were born much later, after the dwarves were kicked out of the mountain, they want to help their uncle. They want to bring back the pride of their people and reclaim their homeland. The only other members of the royal family to be in this company are going to be Owen and Glóin. Owen is 167 and Glóin, his younger brother, is 158. And they are the cousins to Thorin. This is important to mention, I feel, because Thorin picked the dwarves in the company based on their skill, not because of their nobility or status. And Owen and Glóin are no exception. Owen is an extremely skilled healer with lots of knowledge of herbs and medicines, and that's going to be very important for such a long and dangerous journey. Versus Glóin has what is described as a shrewd eye for treasure. But what this boils down to is that he can notice things that other people might not. Things that happen in passing that might be important, that he will be able to see and understand. Now, Glóin, if you kind of recognize that name, that is because he is the father of Gimli in Lord of the Rings. Glóin is, as Thorin's cousin, and Gimli being part of the royal family, is actually very close friends with Fili and Kili at this time, that we learn a little bit later in Lord of the Rings, and kind of a throwaway line, where Gimli was actually only 69 at the time of the events in The Hobbit, and so with Fili and Kili being much too young to be on the adventure normally, Gimli was even younger, and that's why he was not allowed to join his father on this adventure. It would be too dangerous. So Owen and Glóin do fill out the royal family, but we have many more dwarves. Next up is Balin and Dwalin, who are brothers, as the rhyming names can kind of hint to. You can see who's related. So Balin and Dwalin are the only other two dwarves who were born at the time of Smaug decimating Erebor. Balin was about a toddler and kind of remembers it, and it's implied that Dwalin was an infant and doesn't really remember anything. So they were born at the time, but they were very young. However, they have become loyal friends to Thorin and very trusted advisors to the dwarves who were displaced. Balin is Thorin's closest friend and isn't afraid to call him out on some stuff. And Dwalin is an incredibly fierce warrior, very skilled in combat, and we learn in some throwaway lines in the appendices of Lord of the Rings that he was the trainer for a lot of the combat for the dwarves in the company as a whole. Of the non-royal dwarves, the next group is Dori, Nori, and Ori, which, you guessed it, they're related. Nori and Ori are brothers, and Dory is their older cousin. Now, at 155, Dory is right up there, born pretty much immediately after the dwarves had to flee Erebor. And he is one of the strongest dwarves, and he is the strongest in the company. And that's going to be very important because they have to have a lot of supplies to make this really long journey. Now, Nori is incredibly crafty and clever, and that's going to be important because, again, on such a long journey, you can expect that you're going to need to fix things or replace things or make things, and so that's why having him there is really nice. And then Ori, at 120, is the youngest non-royal, and right at 120 is him being a adult, right past young adulthood, where he has completed any training for his occupation, which in this case is he's very studious, and he's actually writing down the entire adventure for the dwarves. If you recognize the name Ori from The Lord of the Rings, he is the one whose diary we find in the mines of Moria referencing the drums. So that's another connection for you guys. And then finally, to round it out, we have Bifur, Bofer, and Bomber. Again, Bomber and Bofer are brothers, with Bifur being their older cousin. Now, we don't have ages for them. They're the only ones we don't have ages for, but it is estimated that they are over 150 years old, as that is where being an adult and really being comfortable and knowledgeable and an expert in your field for dwarves is around that age. So Bifur is incredibly resourceful and tough, and he also has a great amount of strength. Then we have Bofer, and so he's actually incredibly cheerful with a love of adventure. And so where his older cousin Bifur doesn't really talk, Bofer is very cheerful, and that's really good for morale for a very long journey ahead. And then finally, rounding out is Bomber. While Bomber is the clumsiest of the dwarves, he is also the fastest, and hopefully that will also come in handy. So that is who is invading Bilbo's swamp in the very first chapter of An Unexpected Journey.